Miguel Reyes wiped the sweat from his brow as he pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the Horizon Technologies building. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished marble floor he'd spent hours perfecting earlier that day. It was nearly midnight, and the 60-story skyscraper in downtown Seattle had emptied hours ago, leaving only the night security guards and Miguel to keep the building company. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 42, Miguel had spent the last 15 years of his life cleaning the offices of people who rarely noticed him. He was invisible, a ghost who moved through the building after hours, erasing the evidence of the day's activities before they began anew the next morning. Most nights, he didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think, to listen to his audiobooks through the single earbud he kept in his right ear. Company policy forbade having both ears covered, and to daydream about the life he might have had if circumstances had been different. Tonight, he was listening to a course on small business management. Miguel had always dreamed of opening his own restaurant, serving his grandmother's recipes that had been passed down through generations of his family in Mexico. He'd been saving for years, squirreling away every extra penny, working double shifts whenever possible. At his current rate, he figured he might have enough for a small food truck in another 5 years. It wasn't the cozy restaurant with red checkered tablecloths he'd imagined, but it would be a start. Miguel hummed along to the salsa music playing softly in his ear as he made his way to the executive floor. The top executives' offices were always his last stop of the night. He typically saved them for last, because they were the quietest, the most peaceful. Unlike the chaotic open-plan areas of the lower floors, with their scattered papers and forgotten coffee cups, the executive offices were pristine sanctuaries of power. As the elevator doors opened onto the 58th floor, Miguel wheeled his cart out and headed toward the first office on his rotation. The lights in the hallway were dimmed to half power, casting long shadows that danced along the walls as he moved. He'd just reached the first door when he heard something, a thud, followed by what sounded like a groan. Miguel paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. The executive floor should have been empty at this hour. The executives of Horizon Technologies rarely stayed past 7, and it was now approaching midnight. He listened intently, wondering if he'd imagined the sound. There it was again, a distinctive moan, unmistakably human, coming from the end of the hallway. From the CEO's office, Alexander Wright, the 36-year-old founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies, was known for his punishing work ethic. The company had grown from a small startup in his garage to a tech giant worth billions in just 8 years, largely due to Alexander's relentless drive and innovative vision. Still, even Alexander usually went home eventually. "Hello?" Miguel called out, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "Is someone there? Security?" No response came, but the hair on the back of Miguel's neck stood up. Something wasn't right. He abandoned his cart and moved swiftly down the hallway, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking slightly against the polished floor. The door to Alexander Wright's office was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the dim hallway. Miguel hesitated just outside, suddenly aware of his position. He was just the night janitor. If Alexander Wright was working late and Miguel disturbed him, it could mean his job. But the strange sound he'd heard. "Mr. Wright?" Miguel called, knocking softly on the doorframe. "It's Miguel, the janitor. Is everything okay in there?" When no answer came, Miguel pushed the door open wider and peered inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Alexander Wright was on the floor beside his desk, his body contorted at an unnatural angle, one hand clutching his chest, his face a mask of pain. His normally tanned complexion had taken on a grayish hue, and his eyes were wide with panic. "Mr. Wright!" Miguel rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside the fallen executive. "What happened? Should I call an ambulance?" Alexander tried to speak, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. His lips were turning blue, and Miguel recognized the signs immediately. His brother-in-law had suffered a heart attack 2 years ago, and Miguel had taken a CPR certification course afterward, determined never to feel as helpless as he had that day. Heart attack. Miguel muttered, pulling his phone from his pocket with one hand while loosening Alexander's tie with the other. "I'm calling 911, Mr. Wright. Hold on." As Miguel quickly explained the situation to the emergency operator, he kept his eyes on Alexander, whose breathing was becoming more labored by the second. The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Emergency services are on their way, sir, but it will take them approximately 8 minutes to reach your location. Do you know CPR?" "Yes," Miguel answered, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the floor beside them. "I'm certified. The patient appears to be having a cardiac event. If he becomes unresponsive or stops breathing, you may need to begin chest compressions. Do you understand?" "I understand," Miguel replied, his own heart racing as he watched Alexander struggle for breath. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It happened faster than Miguel expected. One moment, Alexander was gasping for air, his eyes fixed on Miguel's face with a desperate plea. The next, his body went limp, his eyes rolling back. "Mr. Wright," Miguel patted his face lightly. "Mr. Wright, can you hear me?" No response. Miguel pressed his fingers to Alexander's neck, searching for a pulse. "Nothing. He's not breathing. And I can't find a pulse." Miguel reported to the operator, his training taking over as his mind went surprisingly calm. "Begin CPR immediately," the operator instructed. Miguel positioned himself over Alexander's chest, placed the heel of one hand on the center of his chest, the other hand on top, and began compressions. The expensive silk shirt beneath his hands gave way to the pressure as Miguel counted out loud, maintaining the rhythm he'd been taught. 1, 2, 3, 4. All the way to 30 compressions, then 2 rescue breaths, watching Alexander's chest rise with each one. Then back to compressions. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously as Miguel worked. He was vaguely aware of sweat dripping down his face, of the strain in his shoulders and back, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. A man's life was literally in his hands. "Come on, Mr. Wright," Miguel muttered between sets of compressions. "Don't die on me. Your company needs you. People need you." It might have been 2 minutes or 20. Miguel couldn't tell, before Alexander suddenly gasped, his body jerking beneath Miguel's hands. A moment later, his eyes fluttered open, disoriented and confused. "What? What happened?" Alexander's voice was weak, barely audible. "Don't try to talk, Mr. Wright," Miguel said, relief washing over him. "You had a heart attack. The ambulance is on its way." Alexander's eyes focused on Miguel's face, recognition slowly dawning. "You're the janitor." "Yes, sir. Miguel Reyes." "You saved me?" Before Miguel could respond, the office door burst open as paramedics rushed in, followed by building security. Miguel moved back, giving them space to work, suddenly aware of how inappropriate the scene might look. A janitor hovering over the collapsed CEO, both of them disheveled and sweaty. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the paramedics stabilized Alexander, hooked him up to portable monitors, and prepared to transport him. Just before they wheeled him out, Alexander reached out a weak hand, his eyes searching for Miguel. "Thank you," he said, his voice slightly stronger now. "I won't forget this." Miguel simply nodded, watching as they took Alexander away, leaving him alone in the massive office that cost more to furnish than his entire apartment building. The adrenaline that had kept him going began to fade, and his hands started to shake as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He had just saved Alexander Wright's life. The office felt cavernous and eerily quiet after the departure of the paramedics. Miguel stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. The senior security officer, a man named Johnson who had always been polite to Miguel, approached him with a clipboard. "I need a statement from you for the incident report, Reyes," Johnson said, his tone professional but kind. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Miguel recounted the events as best he could, his mind still reeling from the experience. When he finished, Johnson gave him an approving nod. Quick thinking. Most people would have panicked. He scribbled something on his clipboard. "The company will probably want to talk to you tomorrow. For now, you should probably go home. I think cleaning can wait for one night." "Thank you," Miguel said, suddenly aware of how exhausted he felt. "I think I will." The ride home to his small apartment in the Rainier Valley district was a daze. Miguel kept replaying the events in his mind, wondering if he could have done anything differently, better. By the time he unlocked his door, it was nearly 2 a.m., and his roommate, Carlos, was long asleep. Miguel moved quietly through the apartment, not wanting to wake Carlos, who had an early shift at the construction site where he worked. In the bathroom, Miguel caught sight of his reflection in the mirror and barely recognized himself. His usually neat uniform was rumpled and stained with sweat, his hair a disheveled mess, and there was a haunted look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You saved a man's life tonight," he whispered to his reflection, trying to make sense of it all. After a quick shower, Miguel collapsed into bed, expecting to fall asleep instantly. Instead, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering about Alexander Wright. Would he be okay? What would have happened if Miguel hadn't been there, hadn't heard that sound? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Finally, as dawn began to break, Miguel drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of heartbeats beneath his hands and the grateful eyes of a man he barely knew. When Miguel's alarm blared at noon, he'd set it late, knowing he wouldn't get much sleep. His phone was already buzzing with notifications. There were 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, 2 from his supervisor at the cleaning company, and a text message that simply read, "Please call back regarding last night's incident at Horizon Technologies." Miguel sat up, rubbing his eyes. This couldn't be good. In his 15 years as a janitor, he'd learned one important rule. When management wanted to talk to you, it rarely ended well for the person pushing the mop. With a sigh, he returned his supervisor's call first, preparing himself for the worst. "Miguel, there you are." His supervisor, Ray, answered immediately. "I've been trying to reach you all morning." "Sorry, Ray. I was sleeping. It was a long night." "So I heard." "Listen, there's someone from Horizon Technologies who wants to speak with you. They've been calling me since 8 a.m. Apparently you're some kind of hero?" Miguel's brow furrowed. "I just did what anyone would do." "Well, whatever you did, they're making a big deal out of it," the CEO's assistant called personally. "They want you to come in today." Miguel's stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble?" Ray laughed, a sound Miguel rarely heard from his perpetually stressed supervisor. "Trouble?" "Miguel, they're calling you a hero." The assistant said something about a reward. "Just call this number and they'll tell you what to do next." After hanging up with Ray, Miguel stared at the number his supervisor had given him. A reward? That seemed unexpected. Miguel had never been one to seek recognition, especially not for doing what any decent person would do in an emergency. Still, if Horizon Technologies wanted to give him something, who was he to refuse? Maybe it would be a gift card or a small bonus, something that could go toward his restaurant fund. With that thought in mind, Miguel dialed the number. "Mr. Reyes?" A crisp, professional voice answered after the first ring. "This is Sophia Chen, Mr. Wright's executive assistant. Thank you for returning our call." "Yes, my supervisor said you wanted to speak with me." "Indeed. Mr. Wright has been asking about you since he regained consciousness. The doctors say your quick action saved his life. He would like to meet with you as soon as possible, if you're available." Miguel blinked in surprise. "Meet with me? But he's in the hospital, isn't he?" "Yes, but he's stable and insistent on thanking you personally. Would you be able to come to Northwest Hospital this afternoon? Around 3 o'clock? A car can be sent for you." "A car?" Miguel repeated, feeling increasingly out of his depth. "That's not necessary. I can take the bus." "Mr. Wright was very clear that you should be accommodated in every way. Please allow us to send a car. If you could text this number your address, I'll make all the arrangements." Miguel hesitated, then agreed. After providing his address, he hung up and sat on the edge of his bed, trying to process what was happening. Alexander Wright, one of the richest men in Seattle, wanted to meet with him, personally. Carlos emerged from his room, rubbing his eyes. He'd worked a night shift and was just waking up himself. "Hey, who are you talking to?" he asked, heading straight for the coffee maker. Miguel explained the events of the previous night and the unexpected phone call. Carlos's eyes widened as the story unfolded. "Dude, You saved a billionaire. Do you know what this means? Miguel shrugged. That I was in the right place at the right time? No, man. It means you've got leverage. This guy owes you his life. Do you know what people would pay for that kind of leverage? Miguel frowned. I didn't help him to get something out of it, Carlos. I know. You're a good guy. Too good sometimes. Carlos poured himself a cup of coffee. But think about it. This could be your chance. Maybe he could invest in that restaurant you're always talking about. The thought had crossed Miguel's mind, but he'd dismissed it immediately. Using someone's brush with death to ask for money seemed wrong on every level. I'm just going to thank him for the opportunity to help and be on my way, Miguel said firmly. No asking for anything. Carlos shook his head. Your choice, but if a billionaire wants to give you something, you should take it. Those opportunities don't come around often for guys like us. The car that arrived outside their apartment at 2:30 p.m. was not what Miguel had expected. He had imagined perhaps a company car, something practical and professional. Instead, a sleek black Mercedes limousine pulled up, drawing curious stares from neighbors. A driver in a crisp uniform stepped out and approached Miguel, who was waiting nervously on the curb in his best clothes, dark slacks, and a button-up shirt he usually reserved for church. Mr. Reyes? The driver asked with a polite smile. Yes, that's me. I'm here to take you to Northwest Hospital to meet with Mr. Wright. Please, right this way. Miguel had never been in a limousine before. The interior was all soft leather and polished wood, with a small bar tucked discreetly in one corner. He sat stiffly, afraid to touch anything, feeling completely out of place in this bubble of luxury. The drive to the hospital took less than 30 minutes, but to Miguel it felt much longer. What would he say to Alexander Wright? What could you possibly say to a man whose life you'd saved? You're welcome seemed inadequate somehow. When they arrived, Miguel was not directed to the main entrance, but to a private side entrance where a woman in a tailored suit was waiting. She introduced herself as Sophia Chen, the assistant he'd spoken with on the phone. Mr. Wright is in a private suite on the top floor, she explained, leading him through corridors that seemed far more luxurious than any hospital Miguel had ever seen. He's doing well, all things considered, but the doctors want to keep him for observation for another day or two. What exactly happened to him? Miguel asked as they entered an elevator that required a key card to operate. Acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, Sophia replied. Likely brought on by stress and overwork. The doctor said that without your intervention, he would almost certainly have died before the paramedics arrived. Quote, the elevator doors opened onto a quiet hallway with only 2 doors. Sophia led him to the one at the end and knocked softly before entering. The hospital suite looked more like a luxury hotel room than a medical facility. The medical equipment was there, but somehow designed to blend into the background. Alexander Wright was sitting up in bed, a laptop open in front of him despite the various monitors he was connected to. He looked pale and tired, but very much alive. When he saw Miguel, Alexander's face lit up with recognition, and he set the laptop aside. Miguel Reyes, he said, his voice stronger than it had been the night before. The man who saved my life. Miguel shifted uncomfortably under Alexander's intense gaze. I just did what anyone would have done, Mr. Wright. But it wasn't anyone, was it? It was you. Alexander gestured to a chair beside his bed. Please, sit down. Sophia, could you give us some privacy? Sophia nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. The doctors tell me that I was clinically dead for almost 3 minutes, Alexander continued once they were alone. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known CPR, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'm just glad I was there to help, Miguel said simply. Alexander studied him with curious eyes. How long have you worked at Horizon? 15 years. Alexander's eyebrows shot up in surprise. 15 years? And we've never met? Miguel gave a small smile. I work nights, Mr. Wright. Most executives are gone by the time I arrive. Please, call me Alexander. I think saving my life puts us on a first-name basis, don't you? Miguel nodded. though it felt strange to be on a first-name basis with the man whose name was on the building he cleaned. 15 years, Alexander repeated, shaking his head. And in all that time, I never noticed you, never even knew your name until you were literally bringing me back to life. He looked genuinely troubled by this realization. That doesn't say much for me as a person, does it? You're a busy man, Miguel offered. You can't know everyone in a company that size. Perhaps, but I should try harder. Alexander shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. Tell me about yourself, Miguel. Who is the man behind the heroics? Miguel wasn't used to talking about himself, especially not to someone like Alexander Wright. But there was something in Alexander's expression, a genuine curiosity perhaps, that made Miguel open up. He told Alexander about his family in Mexico, about coming to the United States 20 years ago in search of better opportunities, about his dream of opening a restaurant someday. Alexander listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was truly interested in Miguel's story. There was none of the condescension or distant politeness that Miguel had come to expect from the executives at Horizon. Instead, there was a warmth and engagement that surprised him. A restaurant, Alexander said when Miguel mentioned his dream. What kind of food? Traditional Mexican cuisine from my grandmother's recipes, Miguel explained, passion creeping into his voice despite his attempts to remain professional. Not the Americanized version you find in most places. Real, authentic dishes that tell the story of my heritage. It sounds wonderful, Alexander said sincerely. How close are you to making this dream a reality? Miguel hesitated. I've been saving for years, but it's expensive to start a business in Seattle. Even a small food truck would cost more than I have right now. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Dreams are worth pursuing, Miguel, especially ones born from passion rather than mere ambition. Before Miguel could respond, a nurse entered to check Alexander's vitals, breaking the unexpected connection that had formed between them. As the nurse worked, Alexander turned to Miguel once more. I want to thank you properly for what you did, Miguel, not just with words, but with action. Would you allow me to help you with your restaurant? Miguel's heart skipped a beat. That's very generous, Mr. Wright, Alexander, but it's not necessary. I didn't help you for a reward. I know that, Alexander said with a smile. That's precisely why I want to help. Because you're the kind of person who does the right thing without expectation of return. Those are the people who deserve success. Miguel was speechless. This was the opportunity Carlos had mentioned, falling into his lap without him having to ask for it. But something held him back from accepting immediately. I appreciate the offer, truly, but I need to think about it. It's a lot to process. Alexander seemed surprised by the hesitation but nodded respectfully. Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that the offer stands. He reached for a business card on the bedside table and handed it to Miguel. This has my personal number. Call me when you've decided. Or if you just want to talk. I mean that. Miguel took the card, feeling as though he was being handed something far more valuable than a simple piece of paper. Thank you. As Miguel prepared to leave, Alexander called out to him one more time. Miguel, there's a charity gala at the Four Seasons next Saturday. Horizon Technologies hosts it every year for the Children's Hospital. Would you consider being my guest? I'd like to introduce you to some people who might be interested in your restaurant concept. The invitation was so unexpected that Miguel found himself agreeing before he'd fully processed what was being asked. A charity gala? Him? With Alexander Wright? As Sophia escorted him back to the waiting limousine, Miguel felt as though he'd stepped into someone else's life by mistake. Just 24 hours ago, he had been an invisible figure in the shadows of Horizon Technologies. Now he was being invited to galas and offered financial help by the company's billionaire CEO. The limousine ride back to his apartment was as surreal as the rest of the day had been. Miguel stared out the window at the familiar streets of Seattle passing by, but everything looked different somehow. Brighter, full of possibilities he'd never considered before. When he arrived home, Carlos was waiting eagerly for details. Well, what happened? Did he offer you anything? Miguel sank into their worn couch, still trying to make sense of it all. He offered to help with the restaurant, and he invited me to some fancy gala next weekend. Carlos whooped in excitement. I told you, this is it, Miguel, your big break. But Miguel wasn't sure. Something about the entire situation felt unbalanced, as if the scales had tipped too far in one direction. He had saved Alexander's life, yes. But did that entitle him to financial help? To entry into a world so far removed from his own? As he turned the glossy business card over in his hands, Miguel wondered what would happen next. He had stepped out of the shadows and into a spotlight he'd never sought. The question now was whether he belonged there and what price might come with staying. The week that followed Alexander's unexpected invitation was a blur of nerves and preparation for Miguel. The charity gala at the Four Seasons represented a world so far removed from his own that he found himself lying awake at night, wondering if he should have declined. What did one wear to an event where the minimum donation was likely more than he earned in 6 months? How should he act? What would he talk about with people whose daily realities were so different from his own? These questions plagued him as he continued his nightly cleaning routine at Horizon Technologies, now hyper-aware of the invisible barrier that separated him from the executives whose offices he maintained. The event was still days away, yet it dominated his thoughts, making even the most routine tasks feel surreal. "You're overthinking this," Carlos told him on Wednesday night as Miguel fretted over his limited wardrobe options. "Just be yourself. That's who saved the guy's life, right? Not some fancy version of you." "Being myself is exactly what I'm worried about," Miguel admitted, examining his one suit, a navy blue number he'd purchased for his sister's wedding 3 years ago. "These people will take one look at me and know I don't belong." "Then maybe you need some help," Carlos suggested, pulling out his phone. "My cousin Lucia works at that men's clothing store downtown, the fancy one. Maybe she can hook you up with something nice at a discount." 2 days later, Miguel found himself standing in front of a mirror at Kingsley's Fine Menswear, wearing a suit that cost more than his monthly rent. Lucia, Carlos's cousin, had indeed offered him a substantial employee discount, but even with it, the purchase would deplete a significant portion of his savings. "It's an investment," Lucia assured him as she adjusted the tailored jacket across his shoulders. "Think of it as part of your restaurant startup costs. You're networking, making connections. That requires looking the part." Miguel had to admit the suit transformed him. The charcoal gray material draped perfectly over his frame, making him look taller, more confident. For the first time since receiving Alexander's invitation, he thought that perhaps he could pull this off after all. "Take it," he decided, watching Lucia's face light up. "But I'll need your help with how to wear it properly. I don't want to look like someone playing dress-up." Lucia spent the next hour educating him on everything from how to tie a proper Windsor knot to the correct posture for formal events. By the time Miguel left the store, garment bag in hand, he felt marginally more prepared, at least on the outside. Saturday arrived with alarming speed. Miguel had the night off from work, a rare weekend reprieve arranged by Ray after hearing about the invitation. As evening approached, Miguel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully following Lucia's instructions for each element of his attire. "You clean up good," Carlos remarked when Miguel emerged from the bathroom fully dressed. "Very James Bond." Miguel gave a nervous laugh. "I feel like I'm in a costume." "Nah, man, you look like you belong. Just remember, these rich folks put their pants on one leg at a time, just like us." The same limousine from the hospital visit arrived precisely at 7 p.m. As Miguel settled into the back seat, he realized with sudden clarity that his life had bifurcated. There was before the heart attack and after the heart attack. The Miguel from before would never have imagined himself in a limousine, heading to a charity gala as the personal guest of Alexander Wright. The Four Seasons Hotel gleamed like a jewel in the Seattle night, its entrance lined with luxury cars disgorging passengers in formal attire. Miguel's hands grew clammy as the limousine pulled up to the curb. This was it, his brief venture into a world that wasn't his own. As the driver opened his door, Miguel took a deep breath and stepped out, immediately feeling dozens of curious eyes on him. Who was this stranger arriving in Alexander Wright's personal car? "Mr. Reyes," a familiar voice called. Sophia Chen approached, elegant in a sleek black dress. "I'm glad you could make it. Mr. Wright is already inside and looking forward to seeing you." Miguel followed her through the hotel's grand lobby to a ballroom transformed for the evening's event. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvre. And there, near the center of the room, surrounded by a small group of attentive listeners, stood Alexander Wright. He looked remarkably recovered from his ordeal, dressed impeccably in a tuxedo that Miguel suspected cost more than a year's worth of his salary. There was still a hint of paleness to his complexion, but otherwise, he appeared every inch the powerful CEO. Alexander spotted Miguel almost immediately, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. He excused himself from his group and made his way across the room. "Miguel, you came!" Alexander greeted him warmly, clasping his hand in both of his own. "I was worried you might change your mind." "I considered it," Miguel admitted with a small smile. "This isn't exactly my usual Saturday night." Alexander laughed. "Mine either, to be honest. These events are necessary, but I'd much rather be in jeans and a t-shirt watching old movies." He glanced around the room. "But since we're both here, let me introduce you to some people. There are several restaurateurs and food industry investors I want you to meet." Over the next hour, Miguel found himself shaking hands with more influential people than he'd met in his entire life. Alexander introduced him not as the janitor who saved my life, but as Miguel Reyes, a culinary entrepreneur with an exceptional vision for authentic Mexican cuisine. Each introduction was followed by a brief but passionate explanation of Miguel's restaurant concept, delivered by Alexander with the same enthusiasm he might use to describe one of his own tech innovations. Most surprising to Miguel was how genuinely interested these wealthy individuals seemed in his ideas. They asked thoughtful questions about his grandmother's recipes, about the specific region of Mexico his family came from, about his philosophy on food and cultural preservation. The key to authentic cuisine isn't just ingredients or techniques, Miguel found himself explaining to a woman who, he later learned, owned a restaurant group with establishments across the West Coast. It's the stories behind the dishes, the history, the family memories, the cultural significance. That's what I want to share. "I'd love to hear more," she said, handing him a business card. "Call my office next week. Perhaps we could discuss a pop-up event at one of my locations." By the time dinner was served, Miguel had collected a dozen business cards and had engaged in more networking than he'd done in his entire life. He was seated at Alexander's table, along with several Horizon Technologies executives and their spouses. Miguel expected to feel awkward, to be treated as an outsider, but Alexander skillfully included him in every conversation, drawing parallels between Miguel's expertise in cuisine and the various professional backgrounds represented at the table. "The passion Miguel has for his grandmother's recipes reminds me of how we felt when we were developing our first security protocols," Alexander commented during a discussion about innovation. "It's that same drive to preserve something valuable while making it accessible to others." As the evening progressed, Miguel began to relax, finding that beneath the expensive clothes and privileged backgrounds, most of these people were just that, people. They laughed at jokes, they worried about their children, they complained about traffic. The veneer of wealth and power that had seemed so intimidating began to thin, revealing the humanity beneath. After dinner, while most guests moved to the dance floor, Alexander guided Miguel to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "So what do you think?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the room at large. "Not as terrifying as you expected?" Miguel chuckled. "I'm still processing, to be honest. Everyone's been so welcoming." "Good people recognize good people, regardless of background," Alexander said simply. "But I have to confess, I had an ulterior motive in bringing you here tonight." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I wanted you to see that this world, my world, isn't as foreign or inaccessible as it might seem. The people here aren't special because they're wealthy. They're just people who had opportunities and took them." Alexander leaned in slightly. "I want to be that opportunity for you, Miguel." "What do you mean exactly?" "I've been thinking about your restaurant concept, and I believe in it. I want to invest, properly invest, not just give you money. I want to be a partner in bringing your vision to life." Miguel blinked in surprise. "A partner? You and me? Why not? You have the culinary expertise and the passion. I have business experience and capital. Together we could create something extraordinary." Alexander's eyes were bright with excitement. "I've already had my team looking at potential locations in Capitol Hill and Ballard. High-foot traffic areas with the right demographic for an authentic cultural dining experience." Miguel was speechless. This wasn't a handout or a reward. It was a business proposition. Alexander Wright, tech billionaire, wanted to go into the restaurant business with him, Miguel Reyes, night janitor. "I don't know what to say," Miguel finally managed. "Say you'll think about it," Alexander replied. "Take all the time you need. This would be a major life change, and I don't want you to rush into anything." Before Miguel could respond, they were interrupted by a distinguished older man whom Alexander greeted as the chairman of the hospital board. As the conversation turned to donation amounts and funding priorities, Miguel excused himself to get some air. On a quiet terrace overlooking Seattle's twinkling skyline, Miguel tried to process everything that had happened. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been invisible, another essential worker whom the wealthy and powerful rarely noticed. Now, he was being offered a partnership by one of those very same powerful men. "Quite a view, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. Miguel turned to find a woman in her 50s, elegant in a simple black dress, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated updo. "Yes, it is," Miguel agreed politely. "I'm Eleanor Wright," she introduced herself. "Alexander's mother." Miguel straightened immediately. "Miguel Reyes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wright." "Oh, I know who you are," she said with a warm smile. "You're the man who saved my son's life. Alexander has told me all about you. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time," Miguel said, falling back on the response he'd been giving everyone who mentioned his actions that night. Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps. But what's more interesting is what you've done with that moment. Many people would have leveraged such a situation immediately for personal gain. You didn't." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "It wouldn't have felt right. And that, Mr. Reyes, is precisely why my son is so intrigued by you." She turned to gaze out at the city. "Alexander has been surrounded by people who want things from him since he made his first million at 26. People who see him as a means to an end, a resource to be tapped. You see him as a person." Miguel wasn't sure how to respond to that assessment. "I just treated him the way I'd want to be treated," he said finally. Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. And now he's experiencing something new, genuine friendship without agenda. It's quite refreshing for him." She turned to face Miguel directly. "I understand he's made you a business proposal." "Yes, just now, about my restaurant idea. And what do you think about it?" Miguel hesitated. "It's an incredible opportunity. But you're concerned about his motivations," Eleanor finished for him. "You're wondering if this is just gratitude or guilt, rather than a sound business decision." "The thought had crossed my mind," Miguel admitted. Eleanor's laugh was warm and genuine. "My son has many wonderful qualities, but making business decisions based on emotions isn't one of them. If he's offering you a partnership, it's because he sees value in your concept and in you." She placed a gentle hand on Miguel's arm. "Take the opportunity, Mr. Reyes, not because you're obligated to, but because you deserve it." Their conversation was interrupted as Alexander himself joined them on the terrace. "I see you've met my mother," he said, looking between them with curiosity. "We were just discussing the view," Eleanor said smoothly. "And now I should go find your father before he talks the ear off some poor unsuspecting donor." She gave Miguel's arm a gentle squeeze before departing. "Think about what I said, Mr. Reyes." "What was that about?" Alexander asked once his mother had gone. Miguel considered deflecting but opted for honesty instead. "She was telling me to accept your partnership offer." Alexander smiled. "My mother has always been an excellent judge of character. She liked you immediately, which is rare. She is usually much more skeptical of new people in my life." "Do you have many new people in your life?" Miguel asked before he could stop himself. "Not real ones," Alexander answered with surprising candor. "Most people who enter my orbit want something. Funding for their startup, a job for their nephew, a donation to their cause. There's always an agenda." He leaned against the terrace railing. "That's why you're so refreshing, Miguel. You had the perfect opportunity to ask for something, and you didn't." "Maybe I'm just playing a longer game," Miguel joked. Alexander laughed. "If so, it's working. Here I am, pursuing you instead of the other way around." The evening wound down around midnight, with guests gradually departing after writing substantial checks to the Children's Hospital. As Miguel prepared to leave, Alexander insisted on driving him home personally. "The limousine is so impersonal," he said, leading Miguel to where a sleek Aston Martin waited in the hotel's private parking area. "Besides, I rarely get to drive myself anywhere these days." My security team will have a fit. But sometimes a man needs to rebel in small ways. The sports car purred to life as Alexander started the engine. "Where to?" he asked, as if he didn't already know Miguel's address from arranging previous transportation. Miguel gave his address, still trying to process the surreal nature of being driven home by a billionaire in a car that cost more than he would earn in a decade. As they pulled away from the hotel, Alexander spoke again. "I meant what I said earlier, about the partnership. I've had a team researching the restaurant industry in Seattle all week, and there's definitely a market gap for the kind of authentic experience you're describing." "You've done research?" Miguel was surprised by the thoroughness. "Of course. I don't make business decisions on a whim, despite what my PR team might want people to believe." Alexander navigated through the late-night traffic with practiced ease. "The numbers look promising. With the right location and marketing, we could create something really special." Miguel stared out the window, watching as they moved from the upscale downtown area toward his more modest neighborhood. "Can I ask you something personal? After saving my life, I think you've earned that right. Why are you really doing this? Is it just because I performed CPR, or is there something else?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, focusing on the road. "When you're clinically dead, even for just a few minutes," he finally said, "it changes your perspective. I've built an empire worth billions, but in those moments when my heart stopped, none of that mattered. What flashed through my mind wasn't my company's stock price or market share. It was regrets, things I hadn't done, connections I hadn't made." He glanced briefly at Miguel. "When I woke up and saw you there, it was like being given a second chance. Not just at life, but at living differently. You represented something I'd lost touch with. Genuine human connection without transaction or agenda." "So this is about redemption for you," Miguel said, understanding dawning. "Partly," Alexander admitted. "But it's also about recognizing an opportunity. You have something valuable to offer the world with your culinary vision. I have the resources to help make that happen. It's a partnership that makes sense on multiple levels." As they pulled up outside Miguel's apartment building, the contrast between the luxury car and the modest surroundings stark in the streetlight, Alexander turned to face him fully. "Take the weekend to think it over. Talk to family, friends, whoever you trust. If you decide it's not for you, I'll understand completely. No hard feelings, no impact on your job at Horizon. But if you decide to take this leap with me..." Alexander extended his hand. "I promise you won't regret it." Miguel hesitated only briefly before shaking Alexander's hand. "I'll think about it," he promised. As he watched the Aston Martin disappear into the night, Miguel felt as though he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Behind him was the safe, predictable life he'd always known. Hard work, slow progress, modest goals. Ahead was an unknown landscape of possibility, risk, and potential reward. The weight of the decision kept him awake long into the night. By morning, exhausted but clear-headed, Miguel knew what his answer would be. Some opportunities came once in a lifetime. This was his. On Sunday morning, Miguel sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at Alexander's business card. The embossed lettering caught the sunlight streaming through the window, making the name seem to glow. It was a sign, Miguel thought with a small smile, though he had never been particularly superstitious. Carlos shuffled in, hair tousled from sleep, and headed straight for the coffee pot. "So?" he asked, pouring himself a cup. "How was the fancy party?" "Life-changing," Miguel replied simply. Carlos raised an eyebrow. "That good, huh?" Miguel told him about the evening, the connections he'd made, the conversations he'd had, and, most importantly, Alexander's partnership proposal. Carlos listened with widening eyes, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "Holy shit, Miguel," he said when Miguel had finished. "This is like a movie. Regular guy saves billionaire. Billionaire offers to make his dreams come true." "It's not that simple," Miguel countered. "It's a business partnership. There would be contracts, responsibilities, expectations. It's not just a gift." "Even better!" Carlos exclaimed. "He's not just handing you money. He sees something in you worth investing in. That's respect, man." Miguel nodded slowly. That's what his mother said too. You met his mother? Damn! Carlos shook his head in disbelief. So what are you going to do? I think... Miguel took a deep breath. I think I'm going to say yes. The words, once spoken aloud, seemed to solidify something in Miguel's mind. Yes, this was right. This was his opportunity to leap into the unknown, to pursue the dream he'd held close for so long. I need to call him, Miguel said, reaching for his phone. Alexander answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for Miguel's call. Miguel, good morning. Good morning, Alexander. I've been thinking about your proposal. And? I'd like to accept. I want to be your partner in this venture. There was a brief pause. Then Alexander's voice came through, warm with genuine pleasure. That's wonderful news, Miguel. I had a feeling you'd say yes, so I took the liberty of setting up a meeting with my legal team tomorrow to discuss the details. Are you available at 10 a.m.? Miguel laughed at Alexander's confidence. I work nights, remember? 10 a.m. is perfect. Excellent. I'll send a car for you. There was a pause. Miguel, I want you to know that I'm truly excited about this. I haven't felt this energized about a new project in years. After they hung up, Miguel sat back in his chair, a strange mixture of excitement and terror coursing through him. He had just agreed to go into business with one of the wealthiest men in Seattle. His life was about to change in ways he could barely imagine. We should celebrate, Carlos declared, already opening their refrigerator. I think we have some beers from that six-pack from last weekend. No beer, Miguel decided, standing up. I need to call my family in Mexico. They should hear this news from me, and then... He looked around their modest apartment with newfound clarity. Then I need to start preparing. Tomorrow is the first day of my new life. The meeting the next day at Horizon Technologies' downtown headquarters was unlike anything Miguel had experienced before. The conference room on the top floor offered panoramic views of Seattle and Elliott Bay beyond. Around a massive table of polished walnut sat Alexander, his legal team, a restaurant consultant, a commercial real estate agent, and a marketing specialist. At Alexander's insistence, Miguel took the seat at the head of the table. Gentlemen, ladies, Alexander began, we're here today to discuss the formation of a new business venture between myself and Miguel Reyes. The concept is an authentic Mexican restaurant showcasing traditional recipes from Mr. Reyes's family, with an emphasis on cultural heritage and culinary authenticity. What followed was a 3-hour deep dive into every aspect of restaurant creation: location options, staffing needs, supply chains, menu development, marketing strategies, and financial projections. Miguel's head swam with information, but he forced himself to stay engaged, asking questions and offering insights whenever he could. The legal team presented a partnership agreement that gave Miguel 51% ownership of the business, a controlling interest that surprised him. Are you sure about this percentage split? Miguel asked Alexander quietly, while the others discussed potential locations. Absolutely, Alexander replied without hesitation. This is your vision, your recipes, your expertise. I'm just providing capital and business support. You should have control over the creative direction. By the end of the meeting, they had a preliminary timeline: 3 months for location selection and lease negotiations, 2 months for renovations and kitchen installation, 1 month for staff hiring and training, culminating in a grand opening approximately 6 months from now. It seems so fast, Miguel commented as the meeting concluded and the team dispersed. When you have the right resources, things can move quickly, Alexander replied with a smile. Which reminds me, you'll need to give notice at your cleaning job. You should be focused full-time on restaurant development starting as soon as possible. The reality of what was happening hit Miguel anew. I've been at that job for 15 years, he said softly. It's strange to think about leaving. Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder. Change is always a little frightening, even when it's change for the better. But I have complete faith in you, Miguel. Over the next few weeks, Miguel's life transformed at a dizzying pace. He gave notice at the cleaning company, where Ray congratulated him with genuine warmth while lamenting the loss of his most reliable employee. He spent days touring potential locations with the real estate agent, eventually settling on a charming corner space in Ballard with large windows and an open layout that would allow diners to see into the kitchen. Alexander was present for many of these decisions but never imposing. He offered advice when asked, but consistently deferred to Miguel on matters of restaurant design, atmosphere, and of course, the menu. "This is your dream," he reminded Miguel whenever he seemed overwhelmed by a decision. "What does your instinct tell you?" 6 weeks into the process, Miguel found himself standing in the half-renovated space that would soon become Abuela's legacy, the name he'd chosen to honor his grandmother. Construction workers moved about, transforming the former clothing boutique into a restaurant according to the designs Miguel had approved. The kitchen equipment, top of the line but selected for authenticity rather than flash, was being installed that week. "It's really happening," Miguel said aloud, though no one was there to hear him. "Indeed it is," Alexander's voice came from behind him. Miguel turned to see the tech CEO entering through the front door, casual, in jeans and a sweater. His preferred attire, when not in official Horizon meetings. "I thought you had meetings all day," Miguel said, surprised but pleased by his partner's appearance. "I did, but I canceled the last one. Some things are more important than quarterly projections." Alexander moved to stand beside Miguel, surveying the space. "Besides, I wanted to see how things were progressing. It's looking fantastic." "The contractor says we're ahead of schedule," Miguel informed him proudly. "We might be able to open 3 weeks earlier than planned." "That's excellent news." Alexander studied Miguel's face. "How are you feeling about everything? Still overwhelmed?" Miguel considered the question. The past weeks had been the most challenging and exhilarating of his life. He'd been stretched in ways he never imagined, learning about business licenses, health department regulations, staff management, and 100 other aspects of restaurant ownership. Yet with each new challenge, he'd found reserves of strength and capability he hadn't known he possessed. Less overwhelmed, more energized, Miguel decided. "It's like I've been preparing for this my whole life without realizing it." Alexander nodded with understanding. "That's how it feels when you're doing what you're meant to do. I felt the same way when I started Horizon. Terrified, but completely alive." They walked through the space together, discussing the final touches, the hand-painted tiles being imported from Mexico, the custom wooden tables being crafted by a local artisan, the bar area, where Miguel planned to showcase traditional Mexican spirits beyond the typical tequila offerings. "Oh, I almost forgot," Alexander said as they were preparing to leave. "I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to Miguel. Inside was a plane ticket to Oaxaca, Mexico, departing in 2 days. "What's this?" Miguel asked, confused. "You mentioned that you hadn't been back to your grandmother's village in over a decade," Alexander explained. "I thought you might want to reconnect with those roots before the restaurant opens. Maybe gather some final inspiration, take some photos for the restaurant walls, that sort of thing." Miguel stared at the ticket, speechless. His last visit to his grandmother's village had been for her funeral. He'd always meant to go back, to spend time absorbing the culture and traditions that had shaped his culinary perspective. But there had never been enough time or money. "I took the liberty of arranging accommodations and a local guide," Alexander continued. "Your return ticket is open-ended. Stay as long as you feel necessary. Everything here is under control, and any decisions can wait until you return." "Alexander, I don't know what to say." Miguel finally managed. "This is incredibly thoughtful." "Consider it a business expense," Alexander said with a smile. "Research and development." Miguel knew it was far more than that. It was a gift that acknowledged the deeper purpose behind the restaurant. Not just serving food, but preserving and sharing a cultural heritage. 2 days later, Miguel found himself on a plane bound for Mexico, his mind whirling with emotions. The speed with which his life had changed still left him breathless at times. Just 3 months ago, he had been a night janitor, invisible to most of the people whose offices he cleaned. Now he was a restaurant owner with a billionaire business partner, flying to Mexico to reconnect with his roots before opening an establishment that would showcase his family's culinary traditions. The village of San Miguel Teotitlan welcomed Miguel like a long-lost son. Many remembered him from his childhood visits, and his grandmother's memory was still cherished in the community. He spent days wandering the local markets, rediscovering ingredients and techniques that had faded somewhat in his memory. He visited his grandmother's old friends, collecting stories and recipe variations that had never been written down, only passed from one generation to the next through practice and oral tradition. In the evenings, he sat in the courtyard of the small inn where he was staying, making detailed notes and sketches, occasionally sending photos and ideas to Alexander, who responded with enthusiasm and encouragement. "Trust your instincts," Alexander texted after Miguel sent a particularly long message debating between traditional clay cookware and more practical modern equivalents. "Authenticity matters, but so does functionality. Find the balance that feels right to you." That balance became Miguel's guiding principle as he absorbed the sights, sounds, and flavors of his ancestral home. Some traditions needed to be preserved exactly as they were. Others could evolve without losing their essential character. After 2 weeks, Miguel knew it was time to return to Seattle. The restaurant was nearing completion, and there was still much to do before opening day. He left Mexico with a renewed sense of purpose and a suitcase full of inspiration. From hand-woven textiles for the restaurant walls to recipes refined by generations of his family's cooks. When he landed at SeaTac Airport, Alexander was waiting for him at the arrival gate, a gesture that touched Miguel deeply. "You didn't have to come yourself," Miguel said as they walked to the parking garage. "You could have sent a driver." "And miss hearing about your trip firsthand?" "Not a chance." Alexander's eyes were bright, with genuine interest. "Besides, there have been some developments while you were away." "Good ones." In the car, Alexander explained that a prominent food critic had gotten wind of the upcoming restaurant opening and was keen to feature Abuela's legacy in a major Seattle publication. "This kind of press usually takes months or years to cultivate," Alexander said as they drove toward the city. "But your story, our story, has captured people's imagination. The night janitor who saved a CEO's life, now opening a restaurant dedicated to his grandmother's recipes? It's compelling." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want the restaurant to succeed because of a gimmick or a good story. I want it to succeed because the food is exceptional." "And it will be," Alexander assured him. "But there's nothing wrong with using the narrative to get people through the door. Once they taste your food, the story becomes secondary." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Miguel hired a staff, carefully selecting individuals who shared his passion for authentic cuisine. He trained them personally, sharing not just recipes but the stories behind each dish, insisting that servers understand the cultural significance of what they were presenting to customers. Alexander remained involved but never intrusive, offering business guidance while respecting Miguel's culinary authority. Their partnership deepened into a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared vision. The night before the grand opening, Miguel stood in the completed restaurant, taking in every detail. The warm lighting highlighted the hand-painted tiles and colorful textiles he'd brought from Mexico. The open kitchen gleamed with a combination of traditional and modern equipment. The bar was stocked with artisanal mezcals and tequilas, sourced from small producers in his home region. "It's perfect," Alexander said, joining him in the quiet space after the staff had gone home following the final practice service. "Exactly as you envisioned it, isn't it?" "Better," Miguel admitted. "I never imagined it could actually happen, not like this." Alexander smiled. "That's the thing about dreams, Miguel. Sometimes they're just practice for a reality that exceeds what you thought was possible." They sat at the bar, sharing a bottle of rare mezcal that Miguel had discovered on his trip. As they talked about the journey that had brought them to this moment, Miguel was struck by how far they'd both come since that night when he'd found Alexander collapsed on his office floor. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Miguel said after a comfortable silence had fallen between them. "That night when I found you, why were you working so late?" Everyone else had gone home hours before. Alexander swirled the mezcal in his glass, considering the question. "I was hiding," he finally admitted. "From my empty house, from decisions I needed to make about the company's future, from the reality that despite all my success, I was profoundly alone." He looked up, meeting Miguel's eyes. "Ironic, isn't it? If I hadn't been avoiding my life, I might have lost it entirely. And if I hadn't been working that night shift, trying to save extra money for a dream that seemed impossible, I wouldn't have been there to help," Miguel added. "Sometimes the universe has strange ways of bringing people together." "To unexpected partnerships," Alexander proposed, raising his glass. "And second chances," Miguel added, touching his glass to Alexander's. The grand opening of Abuela's legacy the next evening exceeded even their most optimistic expectations. A line formed outside the restaurant an hour before the doors opened. Inside, every table was filled with eager diners, many of whom had read the feature article that had run that morning in the Seattle Times, detailing the unlikely partnership between the tech billionaire and the former janitor who had saved his life. Miguel moved through the kitchen with confidence, directing his staff with the natural authority of someone who had finally found his true calling. Each dish that left the kitchen was a testament to his grandmother's legacy, elevated by Miguel's own culinary instincts and presented with pride. In the dining room, Alexander played host, greeting guests and sharing the story of how the restaurant came to be. His genuine enthusiasm for Miguel's vision was evident to everyone who spoke with him. As the evening progressed, the initial curiosity of the diners gave way to genuine appreciation for the food. Conversations throughout the restaurant centered not on the unusual story of the owners, but on the exceptional flavors and authentic preparations. Near the end of service, as the crowd began to thin, a food critic from a national publication approached Miguel as he made a rare appearance from the kitchen. "Mr. Reyes," the critic said, extending her hand, "that was one of the most memorable meals I've had in years. You've managed to create something truly special here, a perfect balance of tradition and innovation." "Thank you," Miguel replied, still somewhat uncomfortable with such direct praise. "It's my grandmother's legacy, not mine." "I disagree," the critic said with a knowing smile. "Your grandmother gave you the foundation, but what you've built upon it is uniquely yours. You should be proud." As the last guest departed and the staff began the cleanup process, Miguel and Alexander retreated to a quiet corner of the restaurant. The evening had been an unqualified success. The food had been praised, the atmosphere appreciated, and the reservations book was already filling up for weeks to come. "So," Alexander said, pouring them each a small glass of champagne from a bottle he'd been saving for this moment, "how does it feel to be a successful restaurateur?" Miguel considered the question. 3 months ago, he had been mopping floors and emptying trash cans while dreaming of a different life. Now, he stood in his own restaurant, surrounded by the manifestation of that dream. "It feels," he said slowly, "like coming home to a place I've never been before. Like this is where I was always meant to be, but couldn't find my way until now." Alexander nodded with understanding. "That's how it feels when you're living your purpose rather than just dreaming about it." "I couldn't have done this without you," Miguel acknowledged. "Not just the financial support, but the belief in me, in my vision." "That goes both ways," Alexander replied seriously. "You didn't just save my life that night, Miguel. You reminded me of what living is actually about: connection, passion, purpose. My life was full of success but empty of meaning. This project, our partnership, has changed that." They touched glasses in a quiet toast, two men from vastly different worlds who had found common ground in mutual respect and shared vision. Outside the restaurant windows, Seattle continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware of the small miracle that had unfolded within these walls. Not just the birth of a new culinary destination, but the transformation of two lives that had intersected in the most unlikely of circumstances. Miguel Reyes, once invisible in the shadows of a corporate building, now stood in the light of his own creation. And Alexander Wright, once isolated by his wealth and success, had found connection in the most unexpected place. Sometimes, Miguel reflected as he looked around at his restaurant, his dream made manifest. The most important journeys begin with a single moment of being in exactly the right place at the right time. His had begun with hearing a sound at the end of a darkened hallway. And every step since then, though challenging and sometimes frightening, had led him precisely where he needed to be. "To new beginnings," Miguel said, raising his glass once more. "And the courage to embrace them," Alexander added. As they sat together in the warm glow of Abuela's legacy, both men knew with certainty that what had begun as a moment of crisis had transformed into something neither could have imagined, a partnership based not on obligation or gratitude, but on mutual respect and shared purpose, a friendship that transcended the boundaries of class and background. And, most importantly, a reminder that sometimes life's most profound gifts come disguised as its greatest challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.